All right, welcome back, everybody, to Scar Stories. My name is Nicole Golden, and I am the host. And if you haven't already, I say at the beginning of every Scar Stories podcast, check out my website, NicoleGolden.org. We are in the process. We record these earlier, so maybe it's already there, but in uploading all sorts of resources for you. So I wanted to put up some books, websites, people to follow, just to get more tools in your hands as far as mental health resources go. So make sure you check it out and make sure you subscribe to my weekly emails so you get a free Praying Scared prayer journal. So anyways, just a little blurb about that. I am excited and / nervous about our next guest. Which if you are looking at the names, you're like, oh, this is my husband, Bryant Golden. He is the lead pastor at Centerpoint Church. More importantly, he is Nicole Golden's husband. I'm just joking. Anyways, we were laughing so hard and like picking on each other before this, but we're actually in separate parts of our house right now. So he's downstairs with our 4-year-old who we've tried to silence with the tablet, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. And I'm upstairs in Bryant's office, and I've made my office. And our 1-year-old is in the room right behind me sleeping. So we'll see if we can get through this whole interview without being interrupted by a child. Fingers crossed, we just don't know. But babe, it's good to have you.
I'm glad I got on. I know you have some big time guests coming up, so I'm glad you fit me in. I get an interview on Scar Stories, so it's awesome.
Dave, you're the biggest big time guest we're gonna have.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump right in because I only like to have these about 30 to 45 minutes. So I'm hoping you can stick to that time frame. We'll see.
I will do it.
Okay.
Shoot.
Okay.
Let's go.
So the whole reason why I invited Bryant on is, number one, a lot of you have asked for him to come on, which, okay, I understand. I'm just joking. That's good. But also because a lot of you have had questions about, okay, what if I'm not battling with mental health myself, but I'm married to or parenting or in relationship with someone who has mental illness? And so I told Bryant when we weren't being recorded that I wanted him to be incredibly honest. We've talked through all of these questions just in normal conversation. So I could probably answer all this for him, but it coming from him is going to be more powerful. But I want you to know that everything he says isn't going to shock me or hurt me. We've worked through all of this. And I realized what I was like that first year and a half of marriage. So he has full license to say whatever he wants, and I want him to say whatever he wants. So we've been married for 10 years, just so people know about that. And babe, I think it's important, like, tell them a little bit about our dating experience, because that chair is loud. Every time you move that chair, it makes
Oh, is it? Okay. I'll try not to.
Yeah, no moving.
Too much.
But tell them a little bit about our dating experience, and because I feel like that kind of sets the stage for your shock a little bit better.
Yeah. Okay. So we told the story before, but we were introduced a bunch of mutual friends. They were after me, like, oh, you should meet this girl, and didn't really want to because it just was weird. We'd never met, and so anyway, we ended up on a blind date at Starbucks, which is really out of character for both of us. But we spent like 3 hours there. We talked, and it was like pretty immediate, like in terms of, I mean, we had a few dates right away after that, and then almost after that, it was like it geared up really fast. Like within a month of meeting each other, we were dating, and we got real serious real quick. Just kind of the season of life that we were in, and just really being confident, I think, of like where God was leading us. So anyway, that was March of 2009. So we started dating, and our dating relationship was awesome. Like, even now we talk about it, was a lot of fun. It was incredible. By December, we got engaged, and then we were married by the next May. So just a little bit past a year of meeting each other, we were married. But other than like right before the wedding, and it's like one of the most unbelievably stressful times. Like we always joke about, like, I mean, the wedding kind of sucks in the sense of like, it's great, but there's so much pressure and whatever that the marriage hopefully is a lot better than the wedding. So there was just a lot of pressure leading up to that. So that was the first time like you and I had really fought much or anything like that. But other than that, our dating relationship was great. And we kind of talked about this before. There's probably some level of like arrogance of like, we got this, like we're pretty mature, what we're looking for. We're both following Jesus, all of this stuff. perfect kind of in terms of compatibility. And then where you're going to get to is we got married, and then everything hit the fan, all hell broke loose. And what was like a perfect dating relationship almost immediately, and I mean almost immediately, like it just like unraveled for us. Like it was really bad.
It was bad. Well, and we were so confident that things were so good. I mean, I don't even think we got premarital counseling. I think we just were like, oh, we're fine. What's the point? We've got it. And yeah, so it was a whirlwind experience. And we were older too. I think that's good to note. Like you were older, you already knew kind of the trajectory of where your life was headed. I had graduated from college, had been working for several years. So for us, we weren't messing around. I had already been through a serious relationship. Bryant had been in and out of several relationships, but that's a podcast for another time. Anyways, so we knew what we were looking for. So it went pretty quick. So babe, what were your expectations of what marriage should look like before we actually talk about what ours looked like for that first year? So like, what were your expectations?
Okay. Yeah. So I think at some level, everybody's context for marriage is going to come from their parents a lot of times. So my parents had a great, marriage relationship. They were married for 53 years, and it was like really good. Like my parents didn't have one of the marriages where like they're just working at it all the time. Like where they just make it work. Like my parents, I would say, were best friends. They spent all their time together, raised 5 kids. So that was a lot of my context. And not to say that I had this unrealistic view. I think of like they never fought, or because I watched that like in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But that was a lot of my context of, I thought my dad was a great husband. Like my mom was an incredible example. So that was my context coming in. And so I think there was this, like in the back of my mind of, we're two, we feel like pretty mature people. We're both following Jesus. We're doing all we know to do. We had like started careers at that point, like every box you could check, we had checked off. So it's like, it's going to be good. It's going to be, at some level, it's going to be easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've done it. The way I would say it is in our mind, like we've done everything right. I'm seeing I got a French. I knew this was going to happen. What's up, buddy?
Yeah. Well, and we had done it. I mean, we were both, let's just take it a step further. I mean, we were both virgins when we got married, like the whole 9 yards. And so you would have thought that this thing was going to go off.
Yeah. So for like Christians checking boxes, like we check all the boxes, like we should be good.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, babe, so what happened? Why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell us how I exceeded all of those expectations?
Well, okay. So to be fair too, like, and we talk about this a lot, marriage does not create problems. It reveals problems. And like for both of us.
I was going to say, how is this being fair? So Nicole had 5,000 problems.
Yeah. So it revealed all but seriously for both of us, and how we walked through that and reacted, like how I reacted to a lot of that. I mean, it was just really, it was really difficult. And basically we got married and you started struggling emotionally. Almost immediately. Yeah. And having like emotional breakdowns. And, you always tell the story of, so right after we got married, I was going to take over as lead pastor for a brand new church, Centerpoint, which like we're still at. So there was a lot of like that change going on. You had actually just transitioned, or no, I can't remember, but you're going to transition out of your job into a new like home business thing. There's like tons of transition everywhere. But you tell the story of just being in the office and crying and not knowing why. Yeah. And like, those should be exciting stuff. We were just married. We're going into these new things and kind of new adventures. And then and then it started into outbursts, and it was hard to pinpoint like what's wrong or what, like, we haven't even had enough time to make each other that mad. Like, what is going on? Why do you feel the way you do? And being so confused. But the thing is, you were just as confused. I mean, it was the most, like, you talk about just like walking in the dark, just no context for, why are you dropping F-bombs at me right now? Why are you angry and screaming? Why are you throwing things?
I mean, I'd get physical with you. Yeah.
And this is almost immediately. And like, to try to paint the picture, there was none of this. Like, we had a really healthy dating relationship. And not just that, healthy everything in terms of everything that led up to that, like you through college and your career and all that stuff. So it was so confusing, and there just was no blueprint for like what is this. And then for me, like there would immediately just be anger at you of like, what are you doing? Why have you lost your mind? I mean, that's like what I'm thinking at the time, and just not know what was happening. Anger at, this is not how it's supposed to be. Like a real anger at, we just got married, we did everything right.
Yeah.
If I were to be honest, like I did everything right, and here we are, and we're just getting married, and it sucks. The whole thing sucks. So that's where things were at almost immediately.
Were you angry at God at all in any of that? Like you're angry at me. I feel like, were you angry at God at all in that situation?
I don't know. Probably not in the like an overt way where I'm like shaking my fist at God. It probably was maybe subconsciously, or that wrestling of like, are you serious? Like,
yeah,
I've done everything right. And then honestly, you had done everything right. We've tried to, that whole, it's so funny. Like the book we read from Kate Ballard of there's a little prosperity theology in everybody that comes out of, well, I did everything right, and so God should. And I think on both sides, like I felt that, but it wasn't like an anger at, it was, this stuff happens, but there was just an anger at the situation and like why we were walking through this.
Yeah. And at that time you had no context for mental illness. So what did you think was the problem? Or I guess you kind of answered that. You said you were confused. Did you have
that's the thing. Trying to think back, I don't think I had any idea. I had no context for mental illness. I don't think you did either.
No.
We didn't grow up in environments. And of course, even at that time, 10 years ago, there wasn't a ton being said about it.
Yeah.
That's changed a good bit in culture. I mean, it's changed some in the church, though I think the church, talking about like universal, I think is still way behind.
Yeah.
So you add on top of that, like I'm about to become a pastor, you're a pastor's wife, you're a teacher, all this stuff. Like that's just, in those circles, environments, that stuff wasn't even on the radar. So
no.
I literally had no context, at least for us, and maybe we just didn't know where they were. There was just no stories of like, who's even walked through something like this?
Exactly.
You just feel like crazy. And the thing is, a lot of it was happening to you, but even on my side, there's like, what's wrong with me? Like what, why type of thing. And just not
like almost like, why is she so, why, like, were you feeling, because some of this is new for me that you've expressed, like when you said what's happening with, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I make her happy? Why can't I make her, is that what you mean?
Yeah, maybe. Honestly, when I just said it, I was like, oh, that was good. I haven't.
That's good. Okay. Oh, you're freezing a little bit.
No, is some of that, or was some of that of, on both sides, even with me, like what's wrong with me? Because a lot of times when a spouse is struggling, there is some of that, even at a subconscious level of like, why can't I make them happy? Why shouldn't this be a really great time for us? Most people talk about, you get married, it's amazing. And we're not experiencing any of those things.
Yeah.
So it was just really dark. And then being in the positions that we were in, I'm sure you'll get to this, but like, that kind of struggle is like, well, there's really something wrong with you. You're supposed to kind of be above that. And there was just nobody I knew about who had walked through similar type stuff. So
well, and
darkness is the best picture I could give of that time.
Yeah. And you even attempted to resign. I mean, we were married in May. You were named lead pastor July 4th. And then like my wheels were falling off. And then it got really bad about a month or two later, and you attempted to resign, but the elders wouldn't let you resign at that point. And I'd love to, talk to them about that sometime. But so I never asked you this.
Let me just say some of that real quick, because I think we may circle back around to it, but I think part of that too was that whole, going to resign and all that, when I just taken over as pastor. I think part of that was the context that we both had, that really like, we can't be in this and struggle.
Yeah.
Now we're
unfit for ministry. That was the key.
Which some of that is so destructive. And so a lot of this experience changed our thinking on all of that. And it's changed, of course, how we do ministry and how we view people, and how we even see struggle and entering into people's struggle, and not just, like cutting ties with them. So that was part of that thinking of, oh, there's no room to struggle through this. Like, this just can't happen type of thing. And I think, again, after that thinking kind of changed, but that was the reason that I was like, I can't do this. Like, we're fighting and yelling constantly. And then I'm trying to lead a church, and like, you're contemplating suicide, and our life is a mess. I mean, that's how we felt.
Yeah. Well, and it was. I mean, I don't think it's just how we felt. I think our life was a bit of a mess. So just to be fair. Okay. So, so this is funny. So throughout the summer, we had also just bought a house that we were renovating. It was a foreclosure. So this house was a disaster. So we were painting it, cleaning it from top to bottom. And we, in an effort to try to figure out what was going on, we started meeting with a couple who actually gave me Dr. Kevin Hull's CDs. He had done this little conference at a church and had done a 6-part, CD series or whatever. So I was listening to it. This is before, podcasts and MP3s and everything else. I had it in my little CD player and I was painting, listening to it. And everything he was talking about, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is me. He was dealing with abandonment, acceptance, approval, loss of love, rejection, all those things. And I was at such a low point at this point in my life. Like, just to put it into context, Bryant's being too nice, but like, there were some nights when I'd have an episode where I was getting so physical and so frantic, he would have to pin me down on the ground to try to get me to calm down. So this is just kind of like where we were at. And so, and I'm just psycho. Like, I would come home and start screaming and yelling, and he would get in the car to try to drive just to cool down. And I'd hop in my car and follow him, and then he'd end up at his parents' house, and I'd walk in and drop 5 or 6 F-bombs. And it was one time I ended up at the church, and I walked in, and your dad tried to calm me down, and I stormed past him, and I was so mad because you hadn't been answering your phone. Do you remember this? I grabbed your phone and smashed it against the wall and then walked out. So this was in front of his parents.
That was my razor.
Yeah,
That was my
nice.
Oh,
the razor. R.I.P. razor. Those are the best phones in the world. Let's go back to those. But anyway, so I was at such a low point that I was like, okay, I need help. So I remember calling Kevin. I don't even remember talking to you about it. Did we talk about it, or did I just call and make an appointment?
I honestly don't remember.
Okay. And so he started seeing me once a week, and then he asked for you to start coming. So basically I was going twice a week, once by myself and once with you. So at this point, we still hadn't said it was mental illness. And I remember even when I made the phone call, like I do remember the feelings in the back of my mind, like, this is ridiculous. I'm calling a counselor. These people are quacks, but I don't know what else to do. So I'm going to try. So what were your thoughts initially going to counseling? Like, were you at such a desperate place? You're like, I'm willing to try anything. Did you think it was a joke? Those at first initial appointments, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, it's so funny because that seems like such a lifetime ago. Like, I really have to mentally try to like move myself back into how I thought, because it's so different now. And honestly, like, before I answer that question, I've got to stop now, because like sometimes I get so frustrated I'm like, it's 2021. And people's views of like counseling and mental health is just so antiquated. And yet I understand, like, if I stop and allow myself, I understand it, because that is where I was at. So the whole counseling thing, it was like, I mean, probably in the back of my mind, yeah, there's a need for it for certain people who just, man, are really, they're just really off, just to be honest. And so going was, I think initially for me, well, yeah, something is wrong here. And so I'll go to try to help be supportive to get you help for you. I think the thought of me going because I needed any help was like, that's what allowed me to be able to go. This is not for me. Like, I'm not one of those people that need counseling. So I understand why people think that way. There was no context for that whatsoever. Maybe you need to talk to somebody who needs to walk you through some verses in Romans, and you make fun of this, but it's true, or some stuff that you need to confess. And, sometimes or many times that may be the case. That's not what was going on here. So like the fact of like going to counseling was crazy. And so the thing that I would say about that and several other things that you're probably about to bring up, more than anything, was just desperation. So I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea how to fix it. And like any guy, but maybe especially me, and I'd say there's this feeling of I could figure this out. I could fix this. I know how to help people. even at that age, but I just had no understanding of whatsoever. So it was desperation that little by little drove me, that I was willing to do things and try things I never would have any other time. Cause like, I'm just not that guy. And I think even embarrassment of like, we don't need that. That's not who we are. That's not kind of marriage we have. Like sometimes we just need to try to figure out how to fix this thing. But there was like misunderstanding, pride, don't understand counseling. We're not those people. I know a lot of people feel that way. And that's exactly where like I was at.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do remember starting to feel, when we started meeting with Kevin, some initial like, okay, like we're getting at some stuff. But then we decided, so we probably started meeting with Kevin the beginning of the fall. And then we decided around October to go up to Georgia. And I remember we had been given this couple's name. They meet specifically with people in ministry, and it's like a 2-day intensive. You go up and you drug your feet about that even for a while. But I do remember the reason why you signed off on it was you're like, let's ask Kevin. So in that about month and a half time span, Kevin really won you over, I think.
Yeah, because he like you would, I went with you a few times, and then you would go a lot by yourself, because I think you started like 2 times a week, like you were going into counseling. And so you would come back and say things that Kevin had told you, or ways that he had helped you understand maybe some of what was going on. Again, still didn't have a lot of context, but hey, here's maybe some of the ways you're acting the way you are. Here's what's behind that. And I just more and more as I heard, it was like, well, that makes some sense. And if you feel like this is helping, then I'm all about it. And so, there was that like, okay, and I think I had even listened to some of the stuff that he had taught.
Yeah.
And so it's like, some of that's really helpful. He knows this stuff. So little by little. And I would say this too. And there was also in all that desperation, because it was just months of desperation of like, we're so on fire. We also met with several people of like, hey, this person recommended this person, and it wasn't that helpful, so there were several times we're meeting with people, and so there was some of that as well. And then these people are recommended, and like, okay, I mean, I don't know. But again, what drove it was desperation. So that by that October, we had been married for however many months that is, and it had only gotten worse. It definitely not gotten better. And so I remember preaching on a Sunday morning, I think the night before, like just things were out of control, and emotionally you felt out of control, and we were just yelling back and forth, and then had to go and like preach. And then we were done and got in the car, my little Acura RSX, and to drive up to Georgia. But it was just, well, maybe these people can help. I mean, just so desperate for some kind of answers.
And on the way up, I had another episode where I was trying to throw myself out of the car, and you had to literally like lay me down in the back seat, buckle me in, and you drove one hand on the steering wheel, one hand.
Yeah, so crazy to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had to end up saying we were supposed to make the trip straight through, but we couldn't because I was losing my mind. So we ended up like missing a whole day there. But I do remember that experience was good for me. It was more of a spiritual experience when we were there, because I had to really understand like who I was in Christ. And I had to fully understand what the gospel meant for me and what forgiveness meant. But I do remember when we got home, I think I was under the illusion when we got home from that I was set, that I had been healed, that I was set free. Did you have that same sense?
I think that was the hope. It was like walking on eggshells of like, oh, I hope this took, I think it was that kind of thinking. But again, I think that showed the naivety in our understanding of emotional issues and again, mental illness, which we still had not talked about at that point, and understanding how that all works and what that journey looks like. So there was like, I hope maybe that was it. Like that was the linchpin and we're good, but like not totally sure. But it just, to think back on that, it shows the complete misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of people are at. Sometimes even now they're struggling through something. Well, if I can just, I think it's a self-esteem issue. If I could just get this job, or if this just happens, or I went to counseling 3 times and we're feeling better, and it just doesn't work that way. But that was our thought. That was my thought.
Yeah. And I do remember too, some of this is coming back as we talk about it, but there was a point where we were trying to figure out what was happening. Remember, I went to a general physician and I got blood work done, and then they gave me a questionnaire. And do you remember me calling you and like, I'm like, it's asking me on here, like, do I think about suicide? And you were like, yeah, like you do, you need to say yes. And so I remember filling out this questionnaire and giving it to the doctor, and the doctor looking at me and just being like, you're depressed. And I called you on the way home. I was in tears and I told you, and like, at that point, were you still like, know about, or I know this is like reaching way back, but did you start to maybe think like, okay, we might be onto something here?
Well, again, I didn't know what that meant, but it's like what I knew about depression. I was like, well, that would be characterized as depression. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so, yeah, maybe they can do something that helps. I mean, again, by that point, it was like everything's on the table. So it's medication or it's whatever. I was open because you just want some kind of fix.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So we'll fast forward. So we came back from Georgia. I started meeting with Kevin again because it didn't take long for the wheels to fall off again. And so then around March, you'll remember I called you one day and I said, let me read you something. And I read you the symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And I was ecstatic because I was like, this is finally explaining why I've had all these behaviors and why I've been flying off the handle and all the craziness. I seem to remember you seemed relieved too, but I'm going to bring something up in a second, which made me realize I don't know that you were as relieved as I was. But what were your initial thoughts when I called you and said, hey, Kevin's kind of given me this diagnosis. I think this is kind of what we're up against. I was relieved. Where were you at with that?
yeah, I mean, trying to remember, I think I was too, because again, up into that point, you're so desperate for answers. So at some level, it's like, well, it's some kind of answer. And again, if that would have happened like, 6 or 8 months before, I've been like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But having gone through all that we had gone through, it's like, you're much more accepting of something like that, even though I still didn't really have context for it. So yeah, I think initially there was like relief, and maybe this is okay, here's what it is and just fix this now. I think is probably like what I thought in my mind. So yeah, it was just some kind of answer, even though I didn't understand the answer still.
And I think you were a little bit more open to it too, because we had seen me take some steps. Even in that short amount of time, we had gotten very serious about getting me healthy.
That's what I was gonna say. And we talk about this probably more maybe later, but like it was a combination of things that there was, the physical side of it, and eventually even medication and stuff like that. There was the getting into counseling, understanding mental illness, but then there was also like the spiritual side of it, because there was some stuff that I had to identify and kind of unwind from. So you'd been doing everything you could do trying to take those steps. And after that fall, things did get, somewhat better. Like we'd go longer periods of times where things were not on fire, and like you were feeling better, but it still wasn't normal. But so by that March, so it's like, yeah, I'm open to whatever so that we can try to keep moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is something, like you bring up a good point. It's the four spokes of a chair. Like you can't sit on a chair if one of the legs is missing. So it's like it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, and spiritual. And when someone is sick mentally, you've got to work on all four of those. You can't just focus on the mental aspect, and so that was like our trip to Georgia was really helping me spiritually. And then I really started working out and getting serious about my health around that January. So I was working physically and then mentally and emotionally, like in counseling. So I was trying to work on the whole person, which was I think starting to make the difference. So I will say, so I got that diagnosis, and then there was a special that came out several years later about Brandon Marshall. Do you remember this? It was an NFL football life. Oh, did you freeze? Are you there? Are you with me? He froze for a second. Come back to me. Oh, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, we're still recording. Okay, we'll keep moving. All right. So I was going to say, fast forward several years, and Brandon Marshall came out and did a football life about his journey with borderline personality disorder. And I remember, I think you watched it first. Ryder had just been born, and then I watched it. So I had gone this whole time without medication. Ryder's born. I suddenly have a major setback. We were actually up north visiting your family. I have a major setback. I mean, it was pretty scary. We call Kevin that night. I have an appointment with my OB once we get home. I'm put on medication. So we just started Lexapro. And you watch this NFL Football Life about Brandon Marshall. Then you tell me to watch it. And it's Brandon Marshall talking about his journey with borderline, which borderline, this would have been 6 or 7 years ago. Borderline was just a new diagnosis. Even now, only 1 in 10 people have it. So it's very like it's not widely known. Um, there are high suicide rates with people with borderline, but you watched it. And I remember we had a conversation after you watched it, and you were still, after several years, struggling to accept the diagnosis. And I remember your biggest thing was, what about the kids? Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah. So, and to give some context to that is, after your diagnosis, a little less than a year into our marriage, you really were given a lot of tools to know what was going on in your brain and how you were reacting and the coping mechanisms that you've developed, all the stuff that you talk about a lot. And because of your really hard work and relentless work, and obviously Jesus working and all that, like we began to see incredible progress through all of that. And so after that, and I hate to give timelines because everybody's journey looks different, but after that first year, things were really different for our life. Like moving in, it's honestly, as I look back on it, it is miraculous. It's not everybody's story for sure. But by year 2, like we were really enjoying our marriage and our life, which is crazy when you think about all that we went through. So it really was miraculous. So a couple of years in, like there had been a lot of healing and a lot of normalcy in our life, and more than just normalcy, like we enjoyed and we're loving life and we had our second kid. And then it's kind of like out of nowhere, it was like, this is still a thing, like where you struggled after Ryder was born. And then we saw a thing with Brandon Marshall. And so it was kind of this, okay, yeah, I know you're diagnosed with this, but kind of like we handled it, you figured it out, we're good. And he talked about his journey. Again, everybody's journey is different, even those who are diagnosed with the same thing. But he shared his journey, and it was kind of, it was like, wow, like the reality of what a big deal it is, and how it can impact and affect your life, like really got me. So I think there was just thinking of, we kind of moved past that, and we're good. But man, no, this is a real thing. And like, how does this impact generation? How could this potentially impact our kids? Because up until that point, it had kind of been like, yes, that was really bad, but we've moved on. So I think that's kind of how I saw it. And it was like this reality check.
That's interesting. I said we had talked through a lot of this, but some of this, your perspective is new for me. So it's kind of cool. I know for me, so, we got married in 2010, and then by that March 2011, we got the diagnosis of the borderline. And then we were in Texas for Eric's wedding, my brother's wedding. And we went to Matt Chandler's church, and I share about this all the time, but I remember sitting through that and him explaining that Paul's thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians was actually potentially a mental emotional disorder. And I, in that moment, really felt like God was speaking to me that he wasn't going to remove these mental illnesses. He wasn't going to take all this away. He was going to allow me to struggle through it in order to remind me daily about the importance of the gospel and his love and grace and how I needed to rely on that. And then also because he wanted to use my story. So I had settled in my heart years before that, these things weren't going to fully be taken away, that this was going to be something I was going to struggle with the rest of my life. And I remember for those several years, you and I would have conversations and we'd kind of go back and forth where you'd be like, well, no, I think you can get healthy. I think you can, be healed, and that maybe God could take it away. At what point did you settle in your heart that like, no, this is going to be something my wife's going to struggle with? And at what point did you really just kind of surrender? Okay, like this will be the rest of our lives. Like she can be healthy, but she's not going to be healed. When did you actually come to that? Or was it a gradual process?
I think probably gradual. There's not like some moment or whatever. I think it's more like learning and growing and understanding it, I think was it. There was no like big realization or something like that. So now I think up to that point is, a lot of the struggle had kind of shifted where you'd still have to struggle and battle, and you kind of knew how to do that, but it didn't affect our life as much, to be honest, you know? So, but yeah, there wasn't some big moment, but it was, I think, just more, again, understanding mental illness and how it works and certain things that and honestly, it's like in line with a lot of, everybody is born with certain bents and ways that we're wired in, like, especially with the fall, like if you believe in, like, there's a sin issue that at some level you struggle with your whole life. It's not just mental illness. It's, kind of everybody has that.
Yeah.
Like you're carrying something that it's not just, this just goes away. So I think just understanding mental illness more and kind of how it works. I think, so here's the thing. I think the fear was, how normal and healthy could we be? And I think that's the fear for a lot of people battling through mental illness. Like, what is possible? And that's probably where we're at now. Now, years later, those aren't fears any longer of like, yes, do you, like we all do, there are things that you battle. And in this case, like this borderline, and it's not something that does just go away. But can you live completely healthy and whole and enjoy your life in spite of it? Like, yes, that's possible. And we've lived in that for years.
Yeah.
So.
And I think too, like, because I always come at it from my perspective of like everything that I had to battle through and fight through. But, now it's kind of forcing me to think through your perspective. Like, this was going to be a commitment for you. Like, it was going to be a commitment for me to always fight to get healthy. But it was going to have to be a commitment on your side to stay with me and support me. And even now, like, there'll be seasons, and we can usually, the nice thing is, because I've spent 10 years in counseling, and you still see Kevin and have contact with Kevin. And one of the tools that we found out that was so helpful for you in the beginning was to come with me and have access to Kevin via email, so that Kevin could teach you how to help me when I was going down, a spiral. And so he had to teach Bryant all about borderline, so that Bryant knew, when I started thinking irrationally or when I started getting angry, like what was triggering that. And so there were a lot of times where I would start to spiral, and Bryant would be like, okay, you're afraid. What are you afraid of? And he could help me kind of figure out what was triggering. And so for someone, is that something you would still suggest to someone who's living with someone with mental illness, like going to counseling themselves?
So I just thought, I think it might have been Sandra Stanley actually that said this one time, but you study the people that you love, like in terms of how to love them well. And so I put that under that category of studying the person that you're in relationship with, and that's in multiple different ways. But how can I help them? How can I be there for them? How can I love them all? And one of the ways is I'm going to learn how this impacts them. I'm going to learn what's going on. I'm going to learn the best way that I can help them through this and be a support to them. And so, and to paint a realistic picture, like we already said this, but we were going through it initially. All the stuff we were going through revealed a lot of my own selfishness and anger in the ways that I reacted. And I would just get, I just did not know how to handle my own emotions of what was going on. So I had my own stuff to work through, and it revealed a lot of that. It wasn't just a one-sided thing. I mean, yes, there's this, like the mental illness brought these extremes out. We both had stuff, and it revealed stuff in me that had to be worked on. But anyway, yeah, I think it's the best thing that you could do if someone else is struggling. You're not I want to be careful what I say, but you're not a victim. I mean, yes, I that's not to say some people are not walking through some really difficult things and I get that, but there's a lot of us, like, you're in relationship with somebody who's struggling with anxiety or depression or what, you're in that relationship, and chances are you got your own stuff, and you need to recognize you're not handicapped. Like, God's placed you in that relationship for a reason. Specifically, a marriage relationship is what I'm talking about. And so you get the opportunity and you have the responsibility of studying how to love and help that other person. And God's placed them in your life for a reason. And it's God's will if you're married to them, because you're married to them. And so they're helping you grow, whether you realize it or not. And if you allow them, because that was the case with us, like what you walked through grew me in huge ways. And then it allowed me of like, how can I love you? How can I learn to, be there for you throughout? But it took study. I didn't know how, and asking Kevin questions and, hey, when this happens, how can I interpret and understand what she's thinking and what she's going through emotionally? So
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
I think it's the best thing that you could do.
And I think like we really had to learn to trust each other. And in that situation, it was difficult to trust each other, right? Because so much of the borderline was fear of abandonment. And so I was struggling through, could I trust him? And then obviously like I'm flying off the handle. So could he trust me? And I think we had to make the choice. We were going to trust each other. And I think when we started doing that, a lot of stuff started changing too, because when I was starting to have an episode and Bryant would say to me, you're thinking irrationally, just trust me in this situation. There's nothing to fear. You're safe. I was able to tell myself, okay, you cannot trust, your surroundings right now. You cannot trust what's happening. You have to lean into this person that God's placed in your life and vice versa. And I think the trust, us choosing, I did not feel like it. I'm sure as heck he did not feel like it, but the making the choice of, okay, we only have each other right now and leaning into that, I think that started making a lot of the difference. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think some of it, when you understand things, like things that you don't understand create fear.
Yeah.
Always. When you understand things, even when it's hard, it removes some of that fear. So when I understood what was going on with you, it just removed a lot of that fear where, okay, I know some of why she's doing this and it's not even me. And it just took some of the emotion out of it. So like, I need to try to help her through this. I didn't, again, always do it well, but that helped immensely. Like, if you can take away some of that fear and try to understand something,
Yeah.
it really does help make progress. And it made it more easier to trust, to go, I know where she's coming from. I know this isn't all her. It's, sometimes we have, again, this naive idea of somebody, well, they're just choosing to go off the rails. That's not always the case. Our mind body is very complicated. So again, understanding all that really helped me, but I totally agree. Us making the decision to trust each other, and that just kept growing stronger as we chose to do it and be there for one another. And yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever seriously think about divorce? I mean, I know you and I would throw it around when we were initially fighting.
Yeah. I don't think so, really. I mean, I think there was moments when it was so bad, and it was, and I think we painted a pretty good picture about how bad it was for that season. Like, man, I don't know. I don't know if, if this is going to last, and like those thoughts come into your mind, and it was a very brief season right after we were married. And I know a lot of people have been there, but not seriously. And I think that is so, like, there really was this resolve of like, no, we're going to, we're going to get through this and make it happen. So not seriously, but yeah, those thoughts inevitably enter your mind.
Yeah.
But this just keeps going like this, and this is my life forever, I don't know if we can survive this. So
Yeah. I was just thinking about the time when like we were still living, and to top it off, we had to live at his parents' house for like a couple of weeks, but we were going to go help some.
While we were finishing closing on our townhouse.
Yeah. And so we were going to go help some people move. And as we're going out to the car, I'm throwing my rings at him, and we're getting in the car, and then we're helping people move. They were moving from one house, like literally down the street, to another house. And so as we're moving stuff, we're like, when we're not with people, we're like yelling at each other that we're going to get divorced. And we walk in the house and we're like, oh, hey, like, oh my gosh, it was so crazy. We were so wild back then. But, and then, so baby, talk to me then a little bit about how you let the fear, maybe you still have this fear, I don't know, of, are kids going to be okay? Because I really wrestled through that fear of like, are they going to get these mental illnesses? Are they going to struggle? And I had to really work through that with Kevin. Do you still fear that? Or at what point did you kind of release that? Where are you at in that journey?
Yeah, I feel like you and I have talked about this, but yeah, I would, again, it goes down to understanding it more, like understanding mental illness. So like, there's no fear in that. And I think you and I have talked about that some, and understanding so much, even a mental illness is environmental, and understanding we do have some level of control with we don't, obviously there is generational stuff, and there's stuff that they may be more prone to deal with, but there's not a fear around it. And I think honestly, just, fighting as hard as we've had to fight, and specifically you, and learning so much that you really feel equipped to like help your kids,
Yeah.
be able to watch for certain things, not just ignore things. And some of it just goes down to that, like just not ignore stuff. If there's legitimate things of like, I'm not sure about this, I'm going to get help. I'm going to ask somebody. I'm going to seek wisdom. I'm going to go see a counselor. And we've done that several times with our kids, not because there's some massive issue, but we just need wisdom to make sure we're on it and seeing things with our kids in the season. We don't ignore it. And so, no, I like, you know, and it does come down obviously to not to over spiritualize, but a trust issue. Like we're doing the best we can as parents.
Yeah.
Raise our kids. That's our priority, and trusting the Lord with them. But also like a realization of the control that we have, and just in terms of the environments that we're creating for our kids, and understanding some of what contributes.
Yeah.
Mental illness and some of the stuff even that you've walked through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do want to tell this one story because I've just kind of accepted like the mental illness. Sometimes it makes me look really bad, but I've accepted that's part of who I am. But there was this one time a couple years ago where I was having a terrible day with my anxiety, and I was supposed to go somewhere with Brooke, but I got so anxious. I left the house, got in the car, and drove away without her, and she fell apart inside. And I pulled back. I just ended up going around the driveway or around the neighborhood, but I pulled back in and I walked in, and she was sobbing, and you were upset about how upset I had made her. And then Ryder came down the stairs, just silently crying, holding his hand, like I burned my hand on the curling iron. Like in the process of me having an anxiety attack and leaving, Ryder got his hand burnt. And I just remember falling apart. Like, look what I've done to my kids. Like I've scared Brooke. Ryder got his hand burnt. You were very upset for how it had drugged the kids into all of it, which rightfully so. And I remember I went to see Kevin shortly after that because I had to kind of detox through that situation. But I do remember us, and that was several years ago. We haven't had anything like that major happen since then. But I do think we sat the kids down, and for as much as they could understand, just explain like mommy struggles with this. And we've always been very honest with the kids. For the most part, they don't see that anymore. God's been very gracious, and it's even with some of the years that we've gone through with losing mom, Eric, different things like that, God's really protected us emotionally. But we've been very honest with the kids about mommy struggles with anxiety. That's why she sees Mr. Kevin, and that's why she works so hard. And I feel like it's been really good for our kids for us to have these open conversations. Would you agree?
I do. And even in that was, I think, not too out of the ordinary of, people have fights or whatever. It was, I walked out of the house and Brooke wanted to go with me somewhere, but I think we were so sensitive to the kind of culture we want to create in our home of even that was like such a big deal for us. So this is where I always want to paint a clear picture, because like we try to be so brutally honest. I feel like we have in this podcast about the way like we started, and a lot of it was in that first year. It's not to say there were things after that, but a lot of it, again, and no timeline is the same. By God's grace, like he did so much healing. I say all that to say this, because I think this is where a lot of people struggle if they're dealing with somebody, there's mental illness, stuff they don't understand. If you were in, I feel pretty confident saying this, if you were in our home, you would have no idea about any of that, or somebody struggles with mental illness. And again, on both sides, I don't want to create any unrealistic pictures. It was really bad. But I guess what I want to say is, for those of you who like need hope, and I remember being in this place because I didn't know anybody who had struggled through anything like this. So it's like, I just need somebody to tell me like it can be okay.
Yeah.
As it was then is as good as it can be on the other side, because we have a great marriage. Like we always joke about this. We feel like we have the best marriage of anybody that we know, which I think you should feel that in marriage. Like we are really, like we enjoy our life. We enjoy our kids. It's not perfect, of course, but like it's really healthy. And I just want to say that because it is such a weird juxtaposition to hear all of that. And like, no, it's amazing. Like as dark and as hard as that was, I mean, now we're 10 years in, and it's been years of a really healthy marriage and knowing how to work through this stuff and communicate and all of that and enjoy our life. And that's how we feel week to week. And so as hard as that was, now all these years later, I look back at that as kind of a blip, as funny as that is to say.
Yeah.
And it's not that deal anymore. It doesn't even impact our life that much. I'm talking about just the craziness of what we went through. It's just a story we tell, and it's a story that helps people. But in no way am like, do I have any regret or carry around any anger or, and I think you would say the same thing. So I just say like, Jesus can heal that. But I want to say this one other thing too, to make sure that I get to it. And I mentioned this when we did a marriage series last year. You have to fight like hell. And the thing that I always want to say is nobody's timeline looks different, and you can't necessarily just get into counseling and in 6 months you're going to be better, any of those kind of unrealistic things. But you are willing to fight. God can heal. And you talked about it earlier, it was a combination of spiritually doing everything I could, meeting with people, getting into counseling, going 2 times a week, us not having the money as newly married people starting a church, but we're going to find it because we're going to do everything possible. If you're going to get healing and help, you have to be radical, you have to be extreme. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. And you were, and it's one of the big reasons that you were able to walk through that healing. So I also want to just challenge people, because I watched that with you, and it's the thing, you have to be extreme. It's going to cost you time. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you embarrassment. And you got to do whatever it takes. And you did whatever it took, and God worked through that. And no, he hasn't fully healed you as you talk about, but he's healed you into place of healthy and wholeness. And everything we imagined when we were dating for marriage, like
we have,
correct me if I'm wrong, like that's where we're at now. And so it's possible. So I just want to tell that to people, because if somebody would have been able to sit down and tell me that when we were going through it, when it was like hopeless, that would have meant the world to me. So
and I have to say, like, yes, I fought like hell, but you were all in to do whatever you needed to do to help me too, and those times when it was just so difficult. And even now, it is so good. But there's even still times where I'll have a little bit of an anxiety attack or whatever. And it's frustrating for you. And I know it's frustrating for you, but you having to slow down and be so unselfish and to just, okay, what can I do? How can I help? And sometimes that means like him working from home and being here for me just so I have extra support, or just being close or whatever. And so I would say to the spouses of those who are listening, like, yes, like those who you're married to, or, you're parenting, they have to do hard work, but then just the power of you being present and you loving them like Jesus, like that is so huge. And I remember understanding the gospel for the first time when Bryant loved me in the middle of my mess. Like that's when I was like, this is what Jesus has done for me. So I love that you've ended it. And it can be so good. You have to hang in there and keep fighting like hell for it. It can be so good. So anything else you want to add or say, or, I do want to say this one thing. Sometimes it can be difficult. So like, I came out of a really difficult environment, and I can say like my parents and I have a really good relationship now. And yes, I have some angst over some of the things that I saw and experienced, but I don't carry anger over it anymore. And kind of like what Bryant said, like I can look back and see how it shaped me into who I am. So do I regret it? No. Like, do I want to change some of it? Sure. But have I been able to accept it's created me into who I am? Yes. And I've been able to deal with that. So I'm not parenting out of angst. I think that would be the thing, is you don't want to parent out of angst. You want to be able to deal with your past so that you can parent realistically and wisely, but not out of angst. And I think that's a big deal. But is there anything else you want to say, babe, just as we finish?
You just kind of I'll end with something similar, because like fear is such a bad motivator with anything. If you're driven by fear, it's terrible in marriage, parenting, whatever. And so I think even trying to get healthy, there can be this form of PTSD of just always fearing when the other shoe's going to drop. It drives you to not trust. Like all of this, if you're going to heal, takes vulnerability, where you have to like, I'm going to put myself out there and I might get hurt again. And I don't know how to say it other than that's what it requires, and that's the only way you're going to find healing. And that's true with your marriage. That's true with your parenting. So you have to be willing to be vulnerable, and you have to, I think what you said, accept things, even the diagnosis, kind of the place of, you have to confront truth and reality. And when you do that, it can eliminate some of that fear, and you can begin to learn and grow and move past that. And so I think that's huge. And then there was one other thing that I was going to say that I think I just lost in
Well,
that.
what you said was so good.
Yeah, but I would say that for real, of just embracing it and trying to eliminate the fear. The last thing I would say is just this is, like, we just have had it wrong for a long time. And I was specifically talking to Christians and people in the church, where we have not understood the fact that we are mind, body, soul. We are wired with all three of those things in mind. And you talk about this all the time, that when the fall happened, it broke everything.
Yep.
So you need to do everything you can to prioritize your mental and emotional health. And it is a thing. And all of the craziness around counseling, or I don't need that, or I'm self-aware, so I can just kind of diagnose myself. Like Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Everybody's got blind spots. You're not as aware as you think you are. You need help. So you need to be in community. You may need counseling. You shouldn't even bat an eye about that.
Yeah.
It's just this crazy thing that we have to undo. And you owe it to yourself to emotionally do whatever you can to make sure, like, my soul is healthy.
Yep.
I'm good for this next season of your marriage and parenting and all of that. So that's the thing that I would say. Like,
which you still go to counseling. Not as often as I go. Like, for me, it needs to be a little bit more intensive, but you still go and still learn stuff about yourself. And even like last week when you went, you were talking to me about, like, there was some of this stuff in the back of my mind, but Kevin really helped me put some of these pieces together. And in some ways it was kind of cool. Like, there were some things that Kevin helped you to see that you needed to celebrate in your life and like grow. And so it was really like, counseling isn't always negative. Sometimes like you're rehearsing things and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not stopping to celebrate this step of growth.
Well, I would say for both of us, like we've said this, it's more just maintaining health. And it's not because there's a crisis, it's really crisis prevention. It's just like you do with anything else. Like, the way you exercise physically it's a similar kind of idea in terms of making sure like you're staying fit emotionally and with your mind. So I totally agree. Like, it's just good to process things, talk through things, for people to help you see things where you weren't necessarily drawing connections.
So good. So I want to leave some people with a few resources just at the end of this. One of the books that we read early on in our marriage that was so good for us was The Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller. And there's a whole chapter in there about how, you were put in a relationship with someone not to make each other happy, but to make each other holy. And that was so good, I think, for both of us to realize, like, I am here to push Bryant to be more like Jesus, and Bryant's here to push me to be more like Jesus, not for us to both be comfortable. But what happens as you both start pursuing Jesus is, like, life gets really good and it's really awesome.
Yeah. And I would just say that because I used to misunderstand that. It's not, God doesn't want happiness for your marriage, but it's, if you prioritize like self-centered, I'm going to get mine first, you're actually never happy. If you push that around to go, I'm going to try to help this other individual, then you get both. Which is always right, because on the front end, you don't understand that. It's like, well, that just sounds terrible. But actually the means to like living and enjoying your marriage.
Yeah. That's so good. It's so good to have him on here, because like, I always want to make sure people understand the reality of what we went through. And then it's good for Bryant to be like, hey, things are good. Otherwise people get off of this and they're like, oh my gosh. Anyways, and then Lisa Turkus just wrote a book, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. I have not read it yet. I've recommended it though to several people. This is so funny, but everybody I've recommended it to have said it is incredible. So, and then there was another book I was just thinking of that I cannot remember what it is now. So I'm sorry. When I think about it, I'll give it to you guys. Bryant mentioned a book by Kate Bowler, Bowler. I can't remember the title of it, but it's basically her memoir. So if you look up her name,
like Everything Happens for a Reason. And Lies,
yes.
That's a great book.
That was a great book. So anyways, there's a couple of books if you guys are looking for some extra resources. But baby, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for being so honest. Why are you laughing at me?
Oh, good. Glad I made it in.
Glad you made the cut. Okay,
Yeah.
well, in fairness, I wanted you on for a while, but I had to schedule a time with your assistant and get on your calendar. So, Mr. like hoity-toity. But
Whatever.
anyways,
All
you
right.
can listen to Bryant weeknights on Unfiltered Radio if you are in the general area down here on Faith Talk. What are the dials, babe?
570, 910 a.m., 102.1 FM, depending on where, or you just go to unfilteredradio.com and you can podcast.
There you go. And
So,
you can hear him on Sundays at Centerpoint Church in Valrico. This is making him uncomfortable, but I love it. All right. Love you, fam. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to head over to the website, NicoleGolden.org, get the Praying Scared Journal, find other resources there. But we're thankful you joined us and love you, babe. See you when I come downstairs.
okay.